The salvage company the Cumberland Southern hired to strip its dead Dell crossing line ran the auction off the tailgate of a stock trailer on a raw Saturday in April, and the auctioneer, a lean, weather-cured man in his 60s with a grey dragoon moustache and a sweat-lined straw hat, had 140 lots to move before dark and no patience for the one he could not open. He sold the rail by the ton and the copper signal wire by the reel, the section shed and the cast depot benches and a safe with no combination, and when the little flat bed of stragglers pulled up under the old interlocking tower at the diamond, he glanced up at it once. The way a man glances at weather he has already decided to ignore, and read the lot off the clipboard in a voice gone flat and quick. Lot 119, the tower, brick base and frame top, as is where is, no key, the company kept none and neither will you, salvage rights to the structure only, the ground stays railroad, who will start me? Nobody started him. 40 men in seed caps looked up at 2 stories of soot-stained brick and weathered boards standing alone over the groaning crossing, its bay window blind with grime, its door bandaged shut with a rusted hasp and a padlock the size of a fist. And not one of them wanted a building he could not get into, on ground he could not keep. A big red-faced man in a barn coat near the front called out, loud enough to buy his laugh, ain't nobody had the key to that tower in 50 years, and the last fella that did is the one that wrecked the Red Wing, and the laugh went around the gravel the way a laugh does when everybody is glad it landed somewhere else. A young woman standing at the back with a canvas tool roll under her arm, mid-20s, a long dark braid over one shoulder, warm olive skin, wiry and small in a weathered brown waxed canvas jacket, said the number before she had decided to say it. $5. The auctioneer looked at her the way you look at a cat that has spoken. $5, I am bid 5. Do I hear 10? And he did not hear 10. He did not hear anything but the wind in the foxtail, and he brought the clipboard down on the trailer rail. Sold, the young lady, $5, and God help you with those stairs. If anyone in that lot had known that inside 11 months 400 people would stand along a fresh painted fence to watch a semaphore blade on that tower drop to clear for the first time in 50 years, while a man of 84 cried into his railroad cap and a county learned it had spent half a century calling the wrong man a killer, the laugh would have died in the red-faced man's throat. Nobody knew. Nobody could know, because the only witness had spiked the truth shut with his own hands and taken the reason to his grave, and the girl who bought it for $5 was the one person alive he had built the whole thing for. Understand who Nora Kessler was that April and who she was not. She was a lock and safe hand, 3 years on the bench rekeying deadbolts and cracking file cabinets for lawyers who had lost the combination, until February, when the shop went to electronic locks and kept the one man who could program them and let go the apprentice who understood the mechanical kind. She had $600, a rented half of a duplex, and by her own flat arithmetic, about 2 months before those facts collided. And she was the granddaughter of Asa Kessler, who from 1952 until the 9th of November 1971 had worked the levers in that tower. The man the county still meant when it said, without needing the name, the one that wrecked the Red Wing. The story every child in 3 townships was raised on ran like this. Dell Crossing was where the Cumberland Southern main crossed the Overmountain branch at a flat diamond, protected by an interlocking, a room of tall steel levers wired, so a man cannot line 2 trains into the same iron at once. And the man who pulled those levers was the towerman. On a sleeting night in November of 1971, the northbound Red Wing, the fast evening passenger train, went into the side of a drag freight on the diamond and 9 people died in the wet dark. And the railroad's own board of inquiry took 11 days to hand down the finding the county has repeated ever since. that the towerman, Kessler, had cleared a signal against a standing order while impaired by drink and lined the Red Wing into an occupied crossing, and was solely at fault. They pulled his card. The Brotherhood spent what it had and lost. No charges, out of mercy, which is the cheapest thing a company can buy and the most expensive thing a town can hold against you. And Asa Kessler never worked a railroad again. He fixed lawnmowers and rebuilt locks in a shed behind the duplex, taught his son's girl to read a train sheet at that same bench, and died 3 winters back with the county still finding somewhere else to look when his name came up. Nora's father had left when she was small, and it was Asa who raised the reading in her, who set her at the kitchen table with an old lever frame diagram and drilled her on locking and cross-locking for the pleasure of watching it take, who told her more than once that a train sheet is a sworn clock, girl, and a clock does not care who is offended by the time. What Nora had that nobody else at that auction had was the one trade nobody had hired for in half a century, poured into her a summer at a time by the man they blamed, and a roll of picks that meant the padlock the auctioneer swore no one could open would take her about 90 seconds. She drove out to the tower the next morning with the bill of sale on the seat, and it is worth slowing down to see the place the way she saw it, because the county had spent 50 years teaching itself to drive past. The tower stood alone in the grown over Y where the 2 lines had crossed, a squat brick lower story blackened by a century of coal smoke, a timber upper story sheathed in board and batten-gone silver, and a glassed bay window jutting toward the diamond like the pilot house of a beached boat, from which a towerman could once see a mile of iron in both directions. The signal masts stood stripped of their blades, and the diamond itself still lay rusting in the weeds under the tower. She kept her word to the padlock in a minute and a half. The hasp screamed off, and she went up a dark enclosed stair with her flashlight and stopped 3 steps from the top. Because she was a person who read floors for a living, and this floor had a fresh page in it. The operating room ran the width of the tower, a museum of one bad night nobody had cleaned up. The interlocking machine stood down the long wall, a frame of 40-odd tall steel levers frozen in 50 years of grease, gone to varnish, painted in the old colours, each with its cast number plate. The operator's desk sat in the bay under the blind windows. The train order hoops still hung on their pegs by the stair, and over all of it lay the soft, even grey of 5 decades of pigeon dust settled fine as flour. And through that grey, from the stairhead to the desk and onto the interlocking machine and back, ran a line of boot prints, crisp at the edges the way prints are only when they are days and not decades old, narrow prints pointed at the toe, a town boot and not a work boot, and at the desk the dust was swept into a smear where the roll top had been forced and the pigeonholes rifled, the spike file where a towerman impaled his used flimsies bare and bright, where a thumb had wiped it clean. Somebody with the nerve for the stairs and no key at all had been up here inside the week, had searched the desk hard and gone away unhurried, and the train order hooks that should have carried 50 years of tissue paper were stripped bare. Dust keeps a confession longer than a man does. She did not call the sheriff, because a broke girl named Kessler accusing somebody of trespass in the tower that wrecked the Red Wing is a story with one ending, and she had been raised by a man who knew to the ounce how that ending weighed. She did what a bench hand does. She laid the folding rule beside the clearest print and photographed the whole line of them, going and coming, 31 frames, and noted in a pocket notebook the date, the hour, the shape of the sole, and the one detail she underlined twice, that the right print bit deeper at the outside edge, the roll of a man who wore his heels over on the outsides of expensive boots. Then she drove to the hardware store, bought her own hasp and a shrouded lock, and hung her own steel on her own door before noon, and at the counter of the crossing cafe a stout woman in her 60s with a short silver perm and a canvas apron rang up her coffee, and asked what the whole county would be asking by Friday. You are the Kessler girl that bought the tower. What do you want with that thing, scrap? Read it first, Nora said, and the woman, Ruthan Poe, looked at her one beat longer than a stranger earns and did not laugh, which put her first on a very short list. The second morning, the tower began to talk. She was working the room the way you work a scene and not a house, corner to corner, and when she swung the heavy stair door shut against the draught, the low sun came in flat across the one strip of wall a door open every working hour of 50 years had always kept covered, and the raking light lifted a ghost off the boards. Chalk, a little column of tally figures, gone soft amber with age but sharp as the hour they were struck, and at the bottom of the column a single zero, and through that zero, corner to corner, a hard diagonal slash. Nora Kessler stood in her $5 tower with the hair standing on her arms, because nobody in that county slashed a zero. One man she had ever known drew every zero of his life with a stroke through it, engineer's habit, so a zero could never be mistaken for the letter O on a train sheet where a wrong figure could kill a trainload of people, and she had watched him do it 1,000 times at a kitchen table on receipts that did not matter. Her grandfather had chalked a tally behind that door, in the one place a searcher's eye would never travel and a duster's rag would never reach, and left it for whoever came into the room able to read it. A train sheet is a sworn clock, and a tally is a sentence if you know the grammar. The column was not tally marks, it was a lever sequence, the order in which a man pulls to line and clear a route, and Asa had taught her to read a frame the way other children learn a hymn. She went down the row of 40 levers with the flashlight and matched the chalked numbers to the number plates. Lever 11, lever 14, the home signal, the distant, and the last figure. The slashed zero was no lever at all, because there was no lever zero, and she stood a long time before that impossibility, before she understood he had not written a zero. He had drawn a target. Above the frame, high on the end wall over the last lever, was the round white face of the tower's train order repeater, a disc the size of a dinner plate with a black circle painted dead centre, and the chalk/ran at the very angle that carried your eye up off the frame and onto that disc, and behind it, when she got the stepladder and put her hand flat on the wall, the plaster gave, hollow, a cavity skinned over with a painted board made to read as solid wall for 50 years. Here is where the difference between searching and reading earns its wage, because the narrow-booted man had stood 3 feet under that disc and gone home, and a slashed zero means nothing to a man who never sat at Asa Kessler's table. The board came away on 2 turn buttons and set back into the wall cavity. Dry as the day it went in was a fixed iron ladder of 3 rungs and, above it, a small square hatch in the ceiling and around the hatch frame, driven home and their heads painted over to hide them, a ring of 10-penny spikes. Somebody had nailed it shut from below and painted the wound to match the wall, the paint 50 years old. Above that hatch was the tower's lamp room, the little peaked loft where a towerman kept his spare signal lamps and his record shelf, once reached by a stair the salvage men had long ago cut out for the lumber, so that to every inspector and scrapper and narrow-booted searcher, it was a dead space under the roof reached by a stair that no longer existed, and nobody in 50 years had thought to open a wall and climb. A tower keeps its alibi over the operator's head, where a busy man never looks. If anybody has ever handed you the piece they laughed at, and kept the rest, stay with Nora Kessler right here, and if you want to know what a spiked hatch and 50 years of dark had been keeping safe over everybody's heads, subscribe, because come morning she sets a borrowed ladder against a ceiling her grandfather nailed shut on the worst night of his life, and climbs to the dispatcher's ledger, her boot beside the last print he ever left in that building, but a building can only tell you what. To learn why, she had to find the one man still breathing who had drawn a paycheck at Dell Crossing, and Ruthin at the cafe gave her the name over a second cup and a look that said she had been waiting to. Lyndon Poe, 84, Ruthin's husband's uncle, a retired agent operator who had worked the wire the night of the wreck, out on a section road in a grey farmhouse with the curtains half drawn. A gaunt man with a deeply lined face and long knotted hands and wispy white hair under a faded railroad cap. And when she said the words lamp room and spiked hatch, he set down the cup he was holding the way a man sets down something gone suddenly heavy, and was quiet for most of a minute. "I sent the wire that finished him," he said at last. "I was the operator at the next station south, and the morning after the wreck the superintendent stood at my elbow and I sent what he told me to send, and I have been sorry every day of 50 years that I did not throw the key out the window instead." He told her what no board of inquiry had, that the wreck was a dispatcher's lap order, 2 trains handed rights to the same single iron in the same minute, and the scared young dispatcher did what the trick chief told him, and the trick chief did what the superintendent, a hard-climbing man named August Vane, told him. And when the Red Wing lay in the ditch with 9 dead, Vane had until the inquiry to make the paper say the fault lay in the tower and not the dispatcher's office. Because a towerman is a brotherhood man you can burn, and a dispatcher's error runs straight up the carpet to the superintendent's own door. Arthur held the true order, Lyndon said. It told him to hold the Red Wing and clear the freight, and he lined it exactly that way, and the freight went onto the diamond with his blade, and then the Red Wing came down out of the dispatcher's mistake against a signal Asa never cleared, because the dispatcher had already told it had the road. The tower's own register would have showed every minute of it in Asa's hand. So the register went missing. Vane's men came for it inside 2 days, and it was gone, and Vane stood up at the inquiry and said the towerman had destroyed his own records to hide his drinking, and the county has believed a dead register ever since. He looked at his hands. I never knew what Asa did up there his last night. He worked out his notice with his keys still on his belt, because Vane wanted the firing to look gentle for the insurers, and I know he asked the roundhouse for a keg of spikes and a pot of grey paint and said it was for the pigeons. I made sure I never knew more, so no man could sweat it out of me. But Vane knew that register was destroyed, because he wrote destroyed on his own inquiry exhibit, and then spent the rest of his life believing his own paper, and so did his son, and so does his grandson. Lyndon Poe rode out with her the next morning and would not stay on the ground. She set the borrowed ladder under the hatch and drew the spikes one at a time, and ring-shank spikes let go the way they do, screaming a 1/4 inch at a pull, and when the hatch came free the air that fell down out of it was the 9th of November 1971, cold lamp oil and dry pine and dust gone soft as felt, and her flashlight went up into a peaked lamp room the width of the tower, spare semaphore lamps in a row, with their red and green roundels dull under the dust, and on the felted floor a single track of boot prints walking from the hatch to the record shelf and back, edges gone soft as a photograph, out of focus, but whole, unbroken. The last walk her grandfather ever took in the trade he was born to, kept 50 years by a room nobody believed you could reach. She set her boot down beside his, never on it, and matched his stride to the shelf, and there, wrapped in oiled canvas gone stiff as boot leather, and tied off in the flat, neat lashings of a man who could not do a careless thing with his hands, lay the bundle. They brought it down together and opened it on clean rags she had bought 2 days before, without knowing why, and you should hear the inventory plain. Because everything that comes after happens, because a careful man wrote it down on a night when nobody would take his word out loud. The tower register, the great ruled book, Every train through Dell Crossing logged to the minute in Assa's slashed zero hand. The whole of the 9th of November complete. The freight onto the Diamond under lever 14 at 11:04. The Red Wing never given a clear blade from that tower. The register the inquiry swore he had burned. Under it, the flimsies, the tissue carbons of the train orders, hooked in sequence. Order number 31 that put the freight on the main and held the Red Wing at milepost 41, in the dispatcher's own transmission, timed and signed, the order that said in black and white that the fault was never in the tower. Under those, a Western Union message blank in August Vane's own hand, block lettered for the wire, to Chief Disbra correct sheet show tower, cleared 1109 destroy register exhibit Av, the superintendent's own order to forge the record. A copy that had reached Assa's hand the way such things reach a man other men are ashamed in front of. And a sworn affidavit, notarized in the county seat 4 days after the wreck, in which Asa Kessler states that he cleared no signal for the Red Wing, that his register was taken from the tower while he was suspended, and that the man who took it was acting for the superintendent. 12 exemplars of his true handwriting pinned behind it back to his army discharge. He had not hidden a grudge, he had hidden a case, and then spiked it into the one room over the heads of the men who would spend 50 years swearing it did not exist, and left it for the only heir he trusted to climb. What the bundle could not prove by itself, the county archive and the state proved for it. And this is where a family's word against a company's word turns into arithmetic. Nora did not take any of it to the newspaper or the church steps. She took it to Errol Tice, 72, a spare, stooped man in rimless glasses, the last lawyer on the square whose shingle predated the interstate, and when he saw the affidavit he took his glasses off. My father sat second chair for the Brotherhood at that inquiry in 1971, he said, and he told me on his deathbed that they lost it on a register that the company said did not exist, and never in 40 years shook the feeling it existed somewhere and he had failed to find it. I have been waiting my whole career to be of use to that file. Tice ordered the certified inquiry record from the State Archive and the original dispatcher's train sheet from the railroad's own historical collection, which the Cumberland Southern, never dreaming what would be laid beside it, provided for a copy fee, and they set the official sheet under glass beside Assa's flimsy of Order 31 and paid 2 forensic document examiners to do it properly, one of their choosing, and one the railroad's insurers chose, and both reports came back with the same ruinous finding. The line-reading tower cleared Red Wing 1109 was written in an ink whose formula was not manufactured until 1973, 2 years after the wreck it claimed to record, added in a different hand and pen than every other entry on the page, and the freight's timing had been altered over an erasure the examiners could still read beneath, from 11:04 to 10:40, to open a gap that never existed. The record had been changed after the fact, exactly as a dead man's affidavit had said, exactly as a superintendent's own wire had ordered, and the register the company swore was destroyed was lying on a lawyer's table in Asa Kessler's slashed zero hand. While all this was quietly assembling, Garrett Vane was learning that the Kessler girl had been 3 times to the State Archive. He was August Vane's grandson, a trim man in his late 50s with barbered steel grey hair and a tanned angular face, chairman of the County Rail Heritage Trust, who gave the Founders' Day address under a photograph of his grandfather, and his solution arrived in 3 prices. Through the trust, he offered her $2,000 for the tower, calling it preservation. Through Tice's office, $30,000. And in May, he came himself, easing a clean crew cab up her gravel and stepping down in polished pointed toe boots worn over at the outside heel, and she did not need to look twice at the boots. And he stood in her doorway and talked first about heritage and then about hazard. That the tower was condemnable, that the trust held the right of way all around it, and every foot of the only road in, and that it would be a shame if a young woman owned a scrap building she could not legally reach across land that was not hers. Nora took the bill of sale off the shelf and read him the line that said salvage rights to the structure, then laid a photograph beside it, 31 frames printed to one page. Narrow pointed prints in 50-year dust beside a folding rule, next to the Trust's own newsletter photo of him at the tower dedication in those same boots, and she said the only sentence she had rehearsed. You climbed my stairs with no key and rifled my grandfather's desk looking for the register your family swore he burned, and the only reason you did not find it is that in 50 years no Vane ever thought a towerman would nail the truth over his own head. He stood very still. Then he said the one honest thing anybody ever got out of him. To the table, more than to her. My grandfather told my father there was a book that could pull the name down, and my father told me the way you hand a man a live shell and call it a keepsake. I have been looking for that register since before you were born. It never once occurred to any of us that he would keep it and hide the plough that ran over him instead. The claim went in through the Cumberland Southern's successor and its insurers rather than a court, because no railroad on earth wants a forensic examiner reading the word forgery off its own train sheet in front of a jury and 9 families in the gallery. What Asa Kessler was owed could not be paid to Asa Kessler, so it was paid where he had aimed it, a wrongful dismissal settlement calculated back across the pension he never drew and 50 years of a name in the dirt. And Nora would not close it without the stipulation Tice told them plainly no number bought back out. The company acknowledged, on the record, in filed writing, that the finding of 1971 was false, that Towerman Asa Kessler cleared no signal for the Red Wing and destroyed no record, that the register had been removed and the train sheet altered to conceal a dispatching error, and that notice of the correction would run in the county paper 4 consecutive weeks, where the original verdict had run for free on the county's own tongue for half a century. The Historical Society met the week the first notice ran, and the woman who had written the Dell Crossing Centennial booklet and quoted August Vane's steady hand in it stood up and said she had written the version she was handed and would count it a mercy to write the one that was true. And Lyndon Poe, come in shaved with his railroad cap in his 2 hands, stood after her. I sent the wire that buried Asa Kessler because a superintendent stood at my elbow, and I have kept my mouth shut for 50 years because I was ashamed, and I am 84, and I would like to spend what I have got left being right out loud. The room stood up while he sat down. Here is what the money did not do. It did not go into a truck or a house. It re-roofed the tower, reglazed the bay, and rebuilt the cut-out stair, and it brought back the one thing the county had taken. Because the story had travelled, the Railroad Preservation Press picked it up, and a restoration Group 2 divisions east came to rewire the interlocking so the frame would throw and lock and clear again. The last complete Armstrong plant of its kind, and they asked Nora to keep the levers, and she could. On a bright Saturday in the fall, 400 people stood along a new white fence, just as the flash forward promised, and Nora Kessler put her hand on lever 11 and then 14 in the order chalked behind a door 50 years before. And out on the mast, the restored semaphore blade dropped from horizontal to clear, red to green, for the first time since the 9th of November 1971, and the railroad men, who know what they are looking at, took their caps off, and it was not for the weather. A bronze marker went up on the brick the county had driven past for 50 years, and it does not carry August Vane's steady hand. It carries one line, that this tower was manned by Asa Kessler, who kept the record true, and whose word outlasted the men who altered it. The register lives under glass in the bay now, open to the 9th of November, and school groups on county history days get walked down the frame and shown a /0 in old chalk behind the stair door. Still there, because some things you restore and some things you only finally read. While Nora tells them what her grandfather told her, that a train sheet is a sworn clock and paper kept carefully is the only witness that never gets tired, never moves away, and never once in 50 years changes its story. If this found you in a season where the people who divided everything up handed you the piece they laughed at, hold on to the Towelman's kind of patience, the kind that writes it down, logs the minute, spikes it safe, and waits for the reader, and tell me something down in the comments, because I read them the way she read that frame. One number at a time, with a flashlight. In the place you come from, what did everybody swear was worthless, or ruined, or guilty, right up until somebody finally learned to read it? A building, a trade, a name, and did the town ever say it out loud? Tell me which, and tell me where you are watching from tonight, because next week I have another one everybody was told to forget. A drowned mill town under a reservoir, a diver's $10 lease on the flooded powerhouse, and a turbine logbook sealed in the wheel pit that says the dam that took the valley failed for a reason the company swore under oath it never could. The evening after the demonstration, Nora swept the operating floor corner to corner, set the order hoops back on their pegs, and shut off the work light, and out the west window the last of the sun came raking across the wall behind the stair door, and the chalk column her grandfather struck there 50 years ago caught it and gave it back. The levers in their order and the /0 at the bottom aimed like an arrow at the disc on the wall, and she left it exactly where it was, because a man had built her a sentence out of numbers and dust, and waited half a century for someone who could read it to the end.